If you wondered about how teams can be better at connecting and working together while being remote, our next talk is for you. Jenny Bramble came up through support and DevOps, cutting her teeth on the interesting role that acts as the translator between customer requests from support and the development team before diving headlong into her career as a tester. Her love of support and the human side of problems lets her find a sweet spot between empathy for the user and empathy for the team. She's done testing, support, or human interfacing for most of her career. She finds herself happiest when she's making an impact on other people, whether it's helping find issues in applications, speaking at events, or just grabbing coffee and chatting. Here's Jenny Bramble for her talk.
Hi everyone, it's Jenny Bramble here. I am so excited to be speaking at Heartifacts. I'm going to be talking to you all today about building better agile teams through play. And you'll have to excuse me, my slides are actually on my second monitor, so occasionally I'm going to glance over there super awkwardly. So one of my favorite things about virtual conferences right now is that we're literally stepping into each other's homes for a half an hour, maybe more. And it's a great opportunity to get to know a little bit about each other. So I'd like to propose a scavenger hunt. Now, I want you to find something in your house that means something to you and show it to us. I'm going to have a thread started on the Slack channel, so pop on over there and post a picture of your treasure and let me know what it is. Here's mine. This is a lyric panel from one of my favorite bands, custom made, part of a Kickstarter, very cute. And it's really special to me because no one else has one like it. It's also my second favorite song that they've ever done. So that's super cool. All right, your turn. Go drop something in the channel real quick so we can talk about it. So like I said, my name is Jenny Bramble. Human interfacing is my absolute favorite thing. I love it when humans and computers talk to each other and make magic. I love it even more when humans and humans talk to each other and make computers make magic. That's what this talk's going to be about. My pronouns are she and her. We're going to start out by talking about what is play. Then why do we play? And why should we bring play back into the workplace specifically? Next, we're going to talk about how we play and how we start playing. And then we're going to have a ton of questions at the end. Don't forget, you can post these on Slack as the talk is happening. It is pre-recorded, so I won't be able to answer them during the talk, but I'll get you on Slack, I promise. First, what is play? Play is often thought of as an activity that children do. Games, puzzles, recess, sports, things that are incredibly serious to the players, but when you look at it, it's a little silly overall, maybe even ridiculous. I'm talking dress up, role play, matching colored squares, painting. These are all playful activities that can seem a little bit silly when you step back and think about them. And yet, play is such an important and vital part of our development that when unstructured playtime isn't present in a child's life, psychologists are concerned. The lack of unstructured playtime makes children score worse on a lot of different metrics. So play is obviously important. The role of play in development describes play as an activity that is desired, involves an imaginary situation, and always involves rules. Now, if you've ever played Tea Party with a 4-year-old, you know that last piece is 100% true. When I talk about play for this talk, I want you to think about a team activity that is fun, collaborative, and bonding. These 3 elements need to be present for it to be considered play for the purposes of this talk. Now, there could be other elements here. We're going to talk about learning. We're going to talk about development and testing our social hierarchies. We're going to talk about creation of things. But for the base definition, this is what I want us to work with. All right. Why play? Well, let's look at animals for a moment. You might notice the cats are my favorite animals. I have a couple of them, Dante and Dax. Animals play to learn skills. When you have a predator animal, they start by catching and clawing and chasing. Prey animals, they run, they hide, they try to escape. When my cats play, they actually play fight a lot. Dante, the older cat, always wins. Dax, the younger cat, basically never wins. That's their social hierarchy, and this is Dax's way of testing it and making sure that it's still in place. Dax, the younger kitten, he plays with a more variety of toys than Dante does, and he plays a lot more often. Right now, Dax is playing and Dante's asleep. What I'm getting at here is that those who have the most to learn play the most. This is one of the reasons that Dax, my younger cat, and younger animals in general play more. They are trying to figure out how they survive in the world, how they thrive, how they can do the things that they need to do to be successful animals. You'll see children do this well. They are encouraged to play because this is how they experiment with their world. This is how they have a safe structure in which to say, does this work? Is this gainful for me? And how they fit into their world is also a huge part of playtime. When children role play, they are experimenting with different roles they can potentially have in the real world. I personally wanted to be a princess unicorn when I role played. I kind of still want to be a princess unicorn, honestly. So why did we stop playing? If this is so vital to our learning and to our mental health and all of this, why did we stop? Well, there comes a point where unstructured playtime doesn't serve our needs as well as other things that we need to do. When we start to move into the adult world, we leave behind tea parties, but we grill out. We stop having recess, we have meetings. Instead of getting together to play street hockey, we go to a pool party. These are fun, satisfying activities, but they're not really play. We do find ways to bring play back into our lives. Board games and video games and pranks on each other. All of this is play. We still bring it in, even though we don't really talk about it as play. When we talk about it as play, it's seen as diminishing the activities we're doing, which I don't want to diminish them at all. They're amazing. They're wonderful. They're bonding, and we need them in our lives. We should start playing again, especially at work. I really want to encourage everyone to bring play back in, and I've got 3 reasons that I want to talk to you about here. And you'll pardon me if I'll drink a little Mountain Dew in the middle. Play helps those with the most to learn. Play creates and reinforces and lets us test the social bonds that we need to operate as a team. And finally, play is good for our professional development. Let's start at the top here. Play helps those with the most to learn. Now, if you're anything like me, you've been in software for more than a hot minute. I've been in software for a lot of hot minutes. However many minutes are in 10 years, it's been more than that. So what do I need to learn? I'm good at this. I can do software, I can test, I can lead people. I'm fine, right? Well, about that. This is the forming, storming, norming, performing model of teamwork. And what it says is that the first phase of a team coming together is essentially someone has a bucket and they pour a bunch of humans in it and they say, ta-da, a team. This leads us into the storming phase where the team is trying to figure out how they work together. It's still a collection of individuals in a bucket. They haven't learned enough about each other to really start to be a strong team. That takes us to the norming phase. We're no longer arguing as much. We're starting to understand our roles as individuals in the team, how we communicate, how we talk to each other, how we work together, and we start to form the bonds that we really need to be a well-performing team, which leads us to the performing phase. Now, this is really interesting because what gets us out of storming and into norming and into performing is learning about each other, finding out how we operate, having discussions about our communication. This is what gets us out of those phases. Play is an amazing way of short-circuiting long storming and norming phases and building a better team faster and stronger in the end. Play helps those with the most to learn. When we're forming a team and when we're on a team, we need to learn about each other so that we can actually become a team and be something that works well together. Play helps us do this in a psychologically safe manner. I want to talk about a couple of games really quickly, particularly some social deduction games. One Night Werewolf is my favorite kind of team bonding social deduction game. I have a couple of others. Honestly, y'all, I have a list. I will give you the list, I promise. In this game, everybody has a role. You've got the werewolves. The werewolves are trying to eat the villagers. The villagers are trying not to get eaten by the werewolves. You have a seer who can look at someone else's cards. You have a minion who's working on the side of the werewolf, making sure nobody knows who the werewolf is. And you've got the troublemaker, which is my favorite card. If you've ever met me in real life, you're probably going, yes, it is. She's essentially an agent of chaos. She can switch 2 cards at random so that if you were a werewolf and you thought you were a werewolf, now you're a tanner and you're on the village team. It's just a little bit of chaos. She doesn't have any discrete knowledge of the game herself. She just causes trouble. What's really interesting about social deduction games, and this one in particular, is that it creates an artificial hierarchy. It creates a world that you need to operate in, and it creates a task that you need to do. You need to work with the other people on your team without knowing exactly who your team is to get to the bottom of this mystery. It's fun, it's interesting, it's collaborative, it's bonding. You will learn so much about conflict resolution within your team by playing a couple of rounds of One Night Werewolf, because it is setting you up to be in conflict. It is setting you up to say, I think that my boss is a werewolf and he's trying to eat me. And you see how your boss reacts to that. You see how someone reacts when they're challenged, potentially incorrectly challenged. How is that conflict resolved? How do we feel about each other afterwards? This is so interesting from a team bonding viewpoint because we need our social hierarchy. But we also need to be able to challenge our social hierarchy. I need to be able to go to my boss and say, man, I don't think this is working out. Or, geez, I have a better idea. Can we try it? Having a framework that is psychologically safe for me to make these challenges, to practice these challenges, is really important. There's not a lot of chances to practice giving someone bad news or telling them something that they may not like. Games provide us that area to practice in. You have tools to start exploring, start looking at the social hierarchy that you've got. Play also creates and reinforces these social bonds. Whenever we are playing, whenever we are doing something collaborative, we are part of a unit. Think about when you were a kid, you had a code word to a tree house. You had a secret handshake. Maybe you had a secret hand sign that you did with your friends. All of these things are something that make us a team, that make us bond better. And these collected experiences start to become an oral history and a tradition of the team. You'll start to see long-lived teams actually have an oral tradition that's passed down to newer members as an initiation almost. I'm not going to dive into this too deeply right now because I'm going to dive into it really deeply in a minute. But I'm glad to talk about it afterwards. So hit me up on Slack, put some questions in the channel. It's going to be great. Play is also good for your professional development. Oh man, so I'm a tester. I'm a test engineer. I hate saying I break software. I make sure the software performs to the expectations we have. And a lot of that is actually problem solving, creating narratives, logic puzzles. These things can't really be practiced outside of real life or in games. Games that create narratives help me create a narrative of a story, of a JIRA story, not an actual story, maybe an actual story, but it helps me create a narrative and say, okay, this is how my user moves through the flow. This is why this is important. Much like testing our social bonds, games actually give us a framework in which to test our professional development and figure out what we know and how to practice it. I'm going to hit this also a little bit later in probably excruciating detail. It's one of my favorite parts of this talk. So how do we play? I'm going to talk about 3 things. I know there's 4 things on the list, but I'm not going to talk about team outings and happy hours right now because a lot of us don't have those. So I'll revisit this talk when the pandemic is over, I promise. We're going to talk about agile ceremonies. We're going to talk about wolf time, and we're going to talk about learning play. So from the top, I have a question, and answer this one in Slack. How do you end your stand-ups? What do you do when everybody's given their report? Do you have something you do, or do you just sort of wander off back to your own little bubble? I asked this question at work. And I know this slide is really small. Don't worry, slides will be provided at the end. I got so many answers. They ranged from silly to outright ridiculous, quite honestly. A lot of teams do a clap. Some teams do snaps. A couple of teams do a wave thing. I do clapping for my team. There were some really fun ones, like shouting a random word of the day. And this is where it gets interesting, because a lot of different teams had something relating to a random word of the day. It turns out there was one person in the company who really liked that as part of stand-up, and you could almost trace how he'd moved around the company by which teams had a random word of the day. Again, this starts to become our oral history, our tradition. It's a history now not only of my team, but also of my company. Everyone who has the same stand-up ritual is part of the same team, the same larger team. These are all forms of play. This is a way to bring that levity in, to bring in that idea of doing something collaborative, bonding, fun. I find it very exciting. Having a team tradition for ending ceremonies is a form of play. This is like jump rope when you're a kid, or the clap thing. It is a form of play. It is collaborative. It is bonding. It is fun. Generally, it's fun. Sometimes they're very complicated and confusing. So the next thing I want to talk about is wolf time. No, wait, let me talk about flow time first. It'll make a lot more sense in a few minutes. So flow is being in the zone. It's that moment where you're like, yes, I could do this forever. I am in a perfect state of concentration. Everything is beautiful. Colors are brighter. I am so enjoying this activity that I'm doing, and I'm making so much headway on it. This is something you want to really optimize for if you're trying to get the most out of your day. So what's wolf time then? Well, if you take flow time and you reverse it, you got wolf time. I can't take credit for this, but I will say it more times than is probably necessary. Wolf time is the idea that you are taking time away from work to do something collaborative, something fun, something relaxing, hopefully. I did find out that playing giant Jenga is not a relaxing activity for me, which is fine. This is a time that we are not necessarily working as a team, but we are doing something that's building the social bonds of our team, that's helping us to be a better team, even if it doesn't look like we're actually working. It's actually become so important at my job that we talk about it when teams are first forming. We talk about, okay, so when are we doing wolf time? Who's going to be in charge? All right, what does wolf time look like? It is semi-structured. It's very regular. In general, I like once a sprint. Some people like once a week. I think once a week is a little bit too often, but your team will may be different. It's at least once a month. Limit it to an hour or less, and generally you want this during work hours, so it feels like people are taking a break, taking a breather. Put someone in charge of arranging it. If you just leave it up to the void to kind of figure it out, no one will do it. So make sure you've got someone in charge. Again, I asked the question at work, what do you do for wolf time? And I know this slide's a little small, so I'll read you off a couple. One of my favorites, my second favorite, is actually I had a team member who hadn't seen the movie Alien. So we booked a conference room and we did team lunch that day. So we actually did this 2 weeks in a row. We watched an hour of Alien and ate team lunch. And then we watched another hour of Alien later the next week and ate team lunch. And if you haven't seen Alien in a while, it is a wonderful, slightly terrifying movie that's made even better when you start being like, Jonesy, where's the cat? Don't go down that hallway. It's a lot of fun, and we were able to talk about this for weeks afterwards. And occasionally someone would peek their head in the conference room and they're like, you watching a movie? You'd be like, yeah, you want to sit in? So much fun. Another team built Lego sculptures, roll D&D characters, make sushi together. I know there's a lot of people that are not in the office right now, and maybe you've never been in the office. So there's virtual ways to do this. I have another list. I will totally provide it, y'all. Jackbox games are really great. Drawful 2 is amazing. You can roll D&D characters together and play a one-shot. It might take you a while to get through a one shot if you only have an hour. When we were in the office, one team made gingerbread houses, and then the rest of the company ate them. So it can be a group activity. Let me talk to you about my absolute favorite wolf time that I've ever done. So to set the scene, my team was in massive crunch time, and morale was down. We were really stressed. We were starting to get snappy at each other. That kind of moment where you feel like the vase is about to fall off the shelf, and you're like, no, morale. So I offered to run wolf time for the team. I took these little canvases. I think they were either 6x6 or 8x8. And I drew our company's logo on them in pencil, gave everybody a little square and said, paint it however you want, but you have to stay in the lines. I had regular paint, metallic paint, glitter paint, actual glitter, glue. I don't know why I had glue in the paint containers, but it's fine. There was some glue. And we made this crazy, awesome picture. It's so beautiful and it's so weird. And each one of our personalities kind of pops out when you look at it. This is something we did. We did this together. Even the people that weren't painting were being art critics, like, oh, I see it's blue. It was so much fun. And we came up with this beautiful painting that hangs in our team space. Every time we would walk past it, we'd be like, do you remember that time? And we had other teams come by and be like, wow, that's beautiful. Even the CEO of our company was like, clever. So it not only was a moment for us to breathe and remember that we're all human and we're all people here, it's also something that's lasted. It's something that we can look at today and say, I remember doing that with you. I remember you're a person too. And I think that's really important, especially in the times that we're in now. We need more space to be human. And Wolf Time gives us that. Like I said, I'm going to skip over team outings and happy hour. They exist. They're wonderful. We will have them again someday. The next piece I want to talk about is learning through play. So this is one of my favorite things ever. I love play learning. I run office hours, which is a time for the test engineers in my company to get together and talk about test engineering things, to have these conversations, to do workshops, and sometimes we play games. What kind of games do test engineers play? Why, let me show you. This is one of my absolute favorite decks of cards. It's called TestSphere. TestSphere cards, look at this, my expansion pack. They have a word on them. They have a category. So this is data, which is a quality aspect. The definition, data moves in, through, and from your app. It can get stuck, lost, scrambled, and duplicated. How does that affect your testing? Is the kind of implied question there. So what I have actually done with this is worked with the Ministry of Test to create a version of TestSphere called TestSphere Arena. TestSphere Arena acts like Uno. And if you look in the corner, you can see I actually did homemade Uno cards. This one says Skip Feelings, which honestly is an entire 2020 mood for me. The idea is you can play light colors on light colors. If you want to play a different color on a different color, then you have to say why. Okay, so I've got data, the quality aspect here, and I want to play the feeling indifferent. So I would have to explain how data makes me feel indifferent, or how indifferent relates to data. And what I would say is that if I'm ever really indifferent to data, then what that tells me is I'm not paying enough attention to it, so I'm probably missing something. And the rest of the people at the table would either give me a thumbs up for, oh yeah, that association makes sense, or a thumbs down for, no, that doesn't make sense. That's too much of a stretch. You don't get to play that card. If you don't get to play the card, it skips you. You can also play a skip on your friends, or you can play a flaky tests, which makes the next player pick up 2 cards. What you get here is a lot of information about how your coworkers think, how they work, and some of the experiences they've had. You are also reminded about a lot of testing pieces that are not necessarily at the top of your mind. It is incredibly fun, but you're also accidentally learning at the same time. I literally have a list of about 20 of those games, including Happiness at Work, or Choose Happiness at Work, which is basically Cards Against Humanity for feelings. You play a black card that says, I must work very long hours, and then you pick a yellow card from your hand that could be a solution to that problem. Like, breathe as much as possible for 4 seconds, hold that breath in for 6 seconds, exhale for 8 seconds. Does meditation help with that? Maybe, maybe not. Ooh, ask a favor, do a favor. That could help me with working long hours. Yeah, so I have tons and tons of games like that, and I will be happy to share them. Games from requirements gathering to tech debt to how the software development lifecycle works, soft skills problems. There's a game for any problem that a team could find themselves facing. And almost every group can find something to improve their skills in. This is another way of testing what I know. Can I build a narrative? Can I make associations with things? Can I make the right choice when I'm asked about requirements? So I hope I've convinced you that play is really important, that bringing play into your work life is going to improve it. So how? We have another graph coming up, y'all. This is the zone of proximal development. This is essentially a description of how we learn. We start with what is known, and that's something I can do completely on my own. I'm an expert at it. I feel good doing it. I could possibly teach someone else. For me personally, that's cupcakes. I'm really good at making cupcakes, y'all. I love them. They're the best. A skill's too difficult to master for someone to master on their own, but can do it with guidance and encouragement from a knowledgeable person, is where most of our growth happens. This is just outside of our comfort zone, but someone can guide us along here. An example for me would be making fondant animals or fondant roses. I'm not confident enough to do that by myself, but maybe with a good tutorial, YouTube video, or friend, I could probably do that pretty easily. Past that is what is not known, something that I can't do even if I've got someone super knowledgeable guiding me. It's just too much. An example would be sugar work. I'm kind of terrified of hot sugar, and I would have a really hard time working with it, even with someone who is very knowledgeable leading me along. When introducing concepts like playtime, wolf time to our teams, we have to be careful not to put it out there too quickly, not to do too much. If your team isn't psychologically safe enough to play, or if you don't have a culture of being psychologically safe enough to have crazy ideas, then it can be really hard to get started. It can be difficult to say, y'all, this is really gonna help us, and have everyone go, ooh, yeah. That's an actual reaction I've gotten from people. And honestly, that can undermine what you are trying to accomplish. It can undermine the whole idea of playtime and the idea of building the bonds even stronger. So start small. That's my biggest piece of advice to everyone, is start small. Look at the culture you've got in your company, in your team, in your peer group, and think about something that you can bring in really easily. A lot of times starting with a stand-up ceremony is a really great place because it's a little bit fun. It's a little bit silly. It takes 10 seconds maximum, and it really gets your day off on the right foot. So try that. Try something like that and gauge the response. If it's a good response, then try something a little bit more out there. I would suggest a scavenger hunt. Oh, coming full circle, I see, Jenny. The idea of the scavenger hunt is to start personalizing our relationship. For me to say to you, show me something special, and for me to say to you, here is something special. This is something that means something to me, and now you know a little bit more about me, how I work, how I operate, and because we've shared, it actually starts making our bond stronger. When I look at you, I'm going to think about that thing, and you're going to think about my weird music. Maybe you'll even be like, so can you send me a link to Ghost Feeder's song Veins? I'm like, sure. It's going to get weird, y'all. these things are really fun. They're really great ways to start small. Once you've got that down and people seem to be responding well, start talking about an agile learning game. So TestSphere if you've got testers. Like I said, I have about a dozen games that I can send you about the requirements gathering. That one's really easy to do over Zoom. And start working this in. Start saying, oh, we're learning about this. We're not just playing, we're doing work, we're learning. And from there you can start moving into more games like Go Fish. Do you want to play Rummy online? How about a rousing game of Settlers of Catan online? Any play is good. Any play that we can get into our lives, into our work lives, is going to increase our bonds. It's going to make us a better, stronger team because it makes us better, stronger people in general. So to recap, play, a team bonding and building activity. Creatures who need to learn the most play the most. Teams that are not incredibly psychologically safe, teams that are still super stormy, really need play. Start small. Don't try and run in with an hour-long session of Go Fish. Start with something smaller. Start with something like Stand Up or an Agile game. And remember, any play is healthy. Anything we can get into our teams that increases this bonding, that lets us test our social hierarchies, that lets us test our professional development is so healthy for us and so amazing for us. As I said, my name is Jenny Bramble. I hope you've been live tweeting this talk. I hope you've been using the hashtags. I hope you're in the Slack channel because we're going to have some rousing conversation after this. This is one of my favorite talks to give because there's so much richness to it and so many things we can learn. All right, y'all, we are going to be switching over to questions now. So I hope you've got them ready.
So one of our Heartifacts members had said they're a recent boot camp graduate with the music performance masters, and advocating for playtime and some of these extras feels really privileged for somebody not used to the tech workplace yet. How would you advocate for them kind of trying to incorporate this into their workplace?
First off, congratulations. Huge accomplishment. So proud of you. Second off, so there are a lot of small steps we can take. And one of the small steps is starting with like stand up and all of that. What I would suggest for you specifically, because you've got a music background, is there is a really great talk by Jess, and I always mess up her last name. I'll shoot it to you on Slack. It is about how music and music theory makes us better people and makes us better tech workers. And it's kind of how she learns through music. And that can be a way to introduce in something that's not necessarily work, but can be a little bit fun. And then say, okay, so I've introduced you to some music theory. I've started getting some of that in there. What's another piece like that we can talk about? Well, we know that music helps us and learning music helps us learn better. So let's do something silly like drawing. A game of Drawful 2 has a lot of similarities to learning music and to doing those kinds of activities. So that can be a way to really sort of slide it in under the radar. And I highly recommend it. If you want more tips and everything, hit me up. And I will find a link to that talk later today.
Yeah. It sounds like your dog wants to play right at the moment.
Yeah, that's my mom's dog. She's not in the house, so I can say I don't like it. It's
true.
a fine dog. He's just loud.
Do you have recommendations for how to introduce people to a more traditional work attitude, or from a more traditional work attitude to having wolf time?
So this is absolutely the absolute hardest thing to do. When you've got a traditional mindset, you've really got that 8 hours, work. Maybe you can take a smoke break, but that's it. And that can be really hard to sort of break into whenever you've got these quote unquote fun things you want to play. I suggest starting with learning games because, we're not playing, we're learning, y'all. And that's another great way to sort of sneak this in. We say, we're not sitting down and doing a puzzle. We're not sitting down and doing a coloring book page. What we're doing is we are refining our ability to gather requirements by playing 99 Balloons. And that can be a really good way to start getting a little bit of that in there. And once that kind of hardcore starts softening a little bit, then you can start talking about other things like, okay, we've done this requirements gathering game. It was really interesting. Let's do a paint by numbers game. It's sort of the same, right? And that could be a really good way to really bring in the idea of play to a workplace that is a little bit more formalized and a little bit less open to those sorts of things.
Yeah. And kind of similarly, I know I personally am part of a brand new engineering department that hasn't had developers before. So I'm one of the first two, and we're slowly bringing in more people over time. Do you have good suggestions on how maybe we could build up a great culture from a tiny team in the beginning?
Psychological safety. Psychological safety, listening to people, and holding space for people who don't want to speak. A lot of times we look at teams and we're like, psychological safety is about having room to speak up, about having the ability to challenge the hierarchies that are in place. It's also about being okay with what's happening. So I have a lot of friends at work who are very quiet, who don't stand up and challenge. And I want them to feel safe to be that person as much as I want people like me to be like, fight the man, or whatever I'm doing at the moment. So I would say psychological safety, hold space for people, and don't overly pressure people to take advantage of the space that we're holding.
Yeah. And I guess final question, do you have thoughts on how to allocate time for these games, especially with work that have either really busy schedules or expect a lot of expectations on like delivery of, code or whatever?
So that is, again, a mindset change and a culture change. If we are in a place where we don't have time to take a break, where we don't have time to step away and say, okay, I need to do this. I need to take care of myself. I need to go use the restroom. I want to go take a walk around the block. If our schedules don't have space for those things in there, then we've got a culture problem at work that we need to start talking about. We must have space to be human, especially during the pandemic, especially with everybody at home and their kids at home, their dogs at home, all of that. We need space to be people more than ever, and we need to work that into our schedules.